Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now in this two-part series, part of my goal is to inspire us all to step up and join the fight. Kind of like President Reagan, there's a call right now to get in the battle. And we can't miss this call. We've got to step up. Now, in this two-part series, I started with the victory of David first. And next week, we'll talk about the conflict. And the reason I've chosen this reverse order is because I want to remind us as Christians, we already have the victory. Christ has already secured us the victory. We often forget this. He's defeated the world, John 16:33. He defeated death, 2 Timothy 1:10. He has already given us victory, 1 Corinthians 15:57. He leads us in the celebration parade, 2 Corinthians 2:14. In the Bible, we are known as conquerors, Romans 8:37, and overcomers, Revelations 3:5. We know we have the victory. I mean, could you imagine joining a sports team and from day one it's like, we are going to win the championship. We know this is going to happen. I mean, that is where we are as Christians. Regardless of how bad this world is going to get, we know we already have the victory. So each of us should know this and be willing to step up. Now, many of us justify our refusal to join in the battle because somehow we convince ourselves that we're not part of the problem-solving equation. If you look in your notes, you see that I've written the problem-solving equation for all of us. Let me find mine somewhere. So what is the problem-solving equation? It's the right tool for the right job with the right operator. Pretty simple. But if any of you have ever done any kind of handyman work, and specifically if you've ever tried to help me with handyman work, you know how difficult this can actually be. I know for many of you, my favorite tool is the hammer. Because it's fairly simple. You just grab it and smash. Other than that, I'm not too skilled. But if you took a hammer with a screw, right, it's not going to come out real well. You're going to get the screw on whatever it is, but it's not going to hold real well. So the first thing we have to start out with is the right tool. And what I'm going to talk about in this series is the right tool that we all need to have, and that's apologetics. Okay, and apologetics is the defense of the historic Christian faith. There's only one point I want to make about apologetics. And that is every believer is called to utilize apologetics. Everyone. A friend of mine had forwarded me a video from a real famous pastor, Bodie Bacham. I don't know too much about the gentleman. But he had a very good sermon, and it was about how there's a misperception that apologetics is somehow reserved for the special forces of Christianity, or that was the metaphor that he used, like only the elite of Christianity are called to use apologetics. And he did a wonderful job of breaking that down, and it's so true. Apologetics is not just reserved for intellectuals or pastors. It's everyone is called to utilize apologetics. And in fact, I'll talk about this more on the next sermon. Every one of you would be more effective at apologetics than I would be. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. You've studied for 4 years, you got a doctorate in it. I understand that, but everybody expects me to have the argument. So when they hear me say it, they assume that the truth I'm talking about is something to do with me, and that's not the case. When you're doing apologetics, all you're doing is proclaiming and defending God's truth. So when it comes from me, people get, and a pastor, they just assume that it's about the pastor. It's not about that. When someone that's why the Bible talks about the foolish confuse the wise. Because just when a normal person is able to utilize apologetics, which is just the proclamation and defense of his truth, they can't blame it on that person's education. They can't point to something that person has done. They just have to recognize, wow, that is unmistakable truth, and I don't have anything else to give that account for. So the question is, well, before we go to that, let's don't just take my word for it. 1 Peter 3. But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of the threats, nor be troubled. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that when they have defamed you as evildoers, those providing good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Now there's a lot in that passage. I mean, we could preach on that entire passage. But again, the single point is that everybody is called to give a defense. Everybody is called as believers to proclaim and defend why it is that they have hope. I think all of us understand that one of the biggest driving forces in the world right now is fear. I mean, if you look at how liberalism works, it works by saying, if you do not stay within our box, if you don't accept trends, if you don't accept this, if you don't accept that, what happens? We cancel you. You are no longer relevant. That entire industry is run on fear. All right? And we are called to have no fear. That is the point of this passage. It's not a promise to say that you won't suffer, that it won't go badly for you. It's just saying that whatever God puts you through, He will give you the strength to carry you through. But not to fear. So why is it, if every one of us is called to do apologetics, why don't more people do it?
Fear.
Fear, yeah. That is true. And I also think, and the way I want to take it, Shane, is that I think we misunderstand the purpose and the path of apologetics. Many times when people think of the purpose of apologetics, they think that apologetics is about arguing someone into the kingdom of God or winning an argument. That is not what apologetics is about. That is absolutely not the purpose of apologetics. Apologetics has a twofold purpose. One is to the believer, one is to the unbeliever. For the believer, it is to embolden you to carry out the Great Commission. Because see, when you know the truth, you're not scared to share the truth. The world wants you to be scared of the truth. See, God is not scared of truth. You have to understand this. God is not scared of truth. I mean, think about it. Think of people that hate Christianity the most, or that are the most public about it. Who's that one comedian who died? George Carlin. George Carlin, your Bill Maher's, Ricky Gervais, all these people who just hate Christianity with an absolute passion. Do they attack it from a logical or a reasonable thing, or do they act like fifth graders who basically name call, mock, and etc., and try to make people think that only an idiot, only a fool will look at Christianity because it's for ignorant people? Right? That is what they do. They want to deceive the world to think that there is no truth, no logic to Christianity, no evidence for it. But yet, if they actually take the time to see that there is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Christianity is the only way. You know, when I used to train in, now I understand when I say that beyond a reasonable doubt, that doesn't mean that you're ever going to have irrefutable or so much knowledge that it's without a doubt. That's why faith is an element. When I used to train lieutenants, when we take them to the provisional rifle platoon course, you know, they're leading a platoon, and in the Marine Corps, you're trying to train officers to be fighter leaders, is what we would call it. And it was always, make a decision, Lieutenant, make a decision, come on, make a decision. But yet, you'd have a lieutenant who's hunkered down, and he was not willing to make a decision because he's like, I don't know where every enemy squad is. I don't know where every mortar position is. I don't know. And it's like, Lieutenant, you cannot have every piece of information. You have got to take what you have and make a decision. And you have plenty of information to make a fighter-leader decision. And that is how life is. If people will examine the evidence, you cannot come away from this life without realizing there is a God, and that God is Jesus the Christ. And that is what apologetics does for the believer. When you know that truth, you're willing to get out and fight for it. My own personal story, you know, you've heard me say it before. I essentially grew up in Mayberry. Wonderful parents, grew up in a Christian home. I mean, it wasn't idyllic, but I thought it was great. Southern Alabama was just a wonderful place to grow up. I went to Annapolis, and it was the first time that I got made fun of for my faith in a very aggressive, demeaning way. And kind of how I perceived it was, people were like, well, of course you believe in Christianity. You're an ignorant country bum from Alabama. Like, you know? And so I really took my faith into a shell for my first 4 years in the military, because I was just mocked for being a dumb country bumpkin that of course would believe in something as silly as Christianity. So it wasn't until I met a chaplain and he helped me along to become a disciple and really get into the Word of God. And then, you know, like it says in John 8:30, 31 through 32, if you will study my Word, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And it was when I really got to understand the Word and study and know His truth that my passion and my boldness, and that's been a 20-year journey I've been on. And now I am not afraid to go toe-to-toe with anybody on arguing for the faith of Christianity. But it's not about me. Every one of you can have that same skill and that same passion. You've just got to be willing to step up and do the work. Now, the second purpose with apologetics, because a lot of you would say, okay, if that's the case, Pastor, then why do I need to engage an opponent if it's all about me just increasing my boldness? Well, the purpose of apologetics, I can't remember if I put this verse up or not. Let's see, I did. 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, I'll just read this. For those weapons of our warfare are not carnal but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought to captivity to the obedience of Christ. The purpose of apologetics when it comes to the unbeliever is so that they clearly know that the reason they're in rebellion to God is not a head issue. It's a heart issue. I have yet to, when I can actually have an unbeliever sit down with me and actually go through his reasons for not believing and actually spend time, not just a one-off 2-hour thing, but actually go through in a long setting, I will finally get that person to recognize, yeah, it's not a head issue. You are able to eliminate every argument I have with a logical, reasonable reason. I recognize now that it's my heart. I just refuse to accept God, is what it comes down to. We can't forget that every unbeliever, when they stand before God in judgment, they're already condemned. We forget that about John 3:16. We read John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him shall not perish. But everybody forgets to read a few passages later that says, the world is already condemned because they have refused to believe in the name of the only begotten Son of God. So the purpose of apologetics with the unbeliever is to help them to see that they're off, because the world will tell them, what, the Bible is just a myth. The Bible is just a bunch of fairy tales, fables. And if you look at popular culture, you will hear that often. In fact, I just saw a thing with Joe Rogan, who's a huge podcaster. He went off all angry talking about the Bible was made by some bishop and Emperor Constantine on his deathbed. It's just a bunch of, that is a fact, and everybody, like, literally that is not actually a fact. That's actually a false. But that's what's put out, and that guy has millions of people that listen to him. So having the ability to engage opponents so they can see that their arguments against the Bible, their arguments against the resurrection of Christ, arguments for the obvious fact that both nature and conscience proclaim that there is a divine entity, destroying these strongholds so they can see and at least recognize that the reason I don't want to believe is because I don't want to believe in my heart. If you have done that, you have won in apologetics. You can never argue someone into the faith. Only the Holy Spirit can call someone into the faith. But you can enable someone to clearly say, I've literally had 5 friends of mine who aren't believers who have told me in one way or another that I can take a Christian and in 5 minutes make him believe he's not a Christian. I'm like, that is a falsehood. You can make someone who thought they were a Christian realize that they're actually not a Christian, but you can never make a Christian not a Christian. They're always a Christian. They may be immature, etc. But there's plenty of people who probably think they're a Christian that actually aren't. And that's a shame as well. So the other thing I want to talk about is the path of apologetics. Now, one of the challenges with apologetics is, apologetics is about principles. It's not a prescription. So what I mean by that is, the best analogy I have is like martial arts. I love martial arts. I always have. Kid, I've always wanted to be like Bruce Lee. Haven't quite got there. In fact, there's a man in this room who's choked me out like 100 times. And I've literally gone 100% against him, and he crushes me. So you can probably all figure out who that gentleman is at some point. Give him a big hug when you see him. Don't let him get out of here without 20 hugs. So in karate, or most striking martial arts, it's very prescriptive. In other words, you train to like, okay, I'm going to hit you with my right power hand to your left temple. And so you train to, to do it, to defend against that specific prescribed way of defense. Now, martial arts are excellent for, discipline. It's a beautiful art for fitness, tradition. I am not knocking some of the great aspects of traditional martial arts. I'm just saying that it's been proven, I think, in the street, Ultimate Fighting Championship, stuff like that, that a traditional martial art is actually not very effective when it comes to actual combat. And if you want to write an email about that, Pastor Chris Antoni loves receiving emails about But it's been found because you'll train like 20 times fighting somebody your same size, which works great, until you have a dude who's 6'8", and he comes with it with an overhand right that you've never seen, and he gets clocked on the top of the noggin, right? So prescription is not the way to go. And unfortunately, Answers in Genesis, which I love, Way of the Maker, which I love, I think they've given people this false idea that apologetics is about, okay, when they ask you this question, you answer in this way. Or if they don't believe in this thing, then you answer with this way. That's great until you actually deal with someone. Because when you deal with someone, you find out that all of their worldview is completely inconsistent. They believe that we came from crystals on the backside of an alien, but yet they're Buddhist evolutionary with a sprinkle of Roman Catholicism in there. So figure out that mix, right? It won't ever work. And that's why we're scared of it, because we don't understand the path. All right? And the path is classical apologetics. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. That's why I'm going to have the informational meeting November 16th. If you pull out your notes, you can see on the back side, that's kind of like the tentative schedule. Now, before you look at that and read some of the titles and think, okay, teleological argument, I can't, you're tapping out before you even come because you see words that you're like, I don't even understand what that means. I understand a lot of titles, and I wish there was another way I could word that, but it would take a sentence to just break that single word down. It's very simple. In fact, I'll just tell you real quick. Teleological argument is Romans 1, which basically just says that creation, the fact of this creation is so intricate, it's so complex, it's so obviously designed that only answer can be a designer. That is the teleological argument in a nutshell. So those are the things we'll go through. And just to give you some context, just 40 classes is what I taught to Pastor Greg and Pastor Chris in 6 lectures. Yeah, about. And I'm not joking. I've not added any more material. I've added a lot more time for questions, a lot more time, because what I realized in that part of my dissertation with them was that the amount of material, it wasn't that it wasn't comprehensible to either gentleman. It was the fact that you need more time to digest it and retain it, to wrestle with it. And so I kind of built this so we can have, just 10, 20 minutes of lecture, and then we can wrestle with the material, talk about it, because the goal is to have this church full of apologists willing to go out and proclaim and defend the truth. Because here's the reality: if you've done any witnessing, you cannot, apologetics and evangelism live in a symbiotic relationship. If you have ever done any witnessing, you know for a fact they challenge you about certain things from the start. Why do you believe the Bible? So, to think that you don't need apologetics is not wise. And especially for those of us with youth. I know when I grew up, again, I grew up in a very Christian community. I walked out the door not really having apologetics because it wasn't a thing. You as a parent, you know for a fact that your child's faith is going to be attacked from the moment they leave your care. And I'm not going to say it's negligent, but I'm going to say it's a poor choice to not arm your kid with a way to defend their faith. So, if you have any inkling, please at least come to the informational meeting. I'll talk more about it there. Obviously, I'm very passionate about the subject, and I, talking to Pastor Greg, I think he enjoyed it. Don't want to put him on the spot, but I think you'll be surprised at your ability to enjoy defending the gospel and how intelligent all of you are and have the ability to do this. All right. All right, let's move on to the job. Now, obviously, you're saying, Pastor, why apologetics? Why this tool? Why? Well, obviously, you got to know the job to pick the tool. It's kind of another thing I'm not very skilled at is car mechanic stuff. In my opinion, maybe car mechanics out there agree or disagree, but one of the big skills in being a car mechanic, right, is being able to discern what the actual problem is, right? Because if you can't start a car, right, is it your electric key that's not working? Is your battery dead? Why is your battery dead? Is there a wire grounding out? Are your spark plugs bad? Is there alternator, because you can waste a lot of time fixing things that don't need to be fixed, right?
I'm breaking things.
Right? That's why it really pays to have friends who are handyman and car mechanics. I just put that out there. So as a pastor, I really feel, we are your pastors because you have confirmed us and you have said that you feel the Holy Spirit is leading us to lead you as a flock. When I envision my role as a pastor, I kind of think of a sheepdog. That's when has anybody ever been to Scottish Highland games where the old man walks out with Kane, he's got that little border collie with him who's super intense? Anybody ever seen that? Right? It's one of the things I want to do before I die. I still got motorcycle racing and a few other things I got to fit in before that. But anyway, so the guy walks out, right? He's got that border collie, and that border collie is so intense, right? He's watching that guy, and that guy whistles, and goes, pooh, pooh. It is super. If you've never seen it, it is pretty cool, because they'll take these geese or ducks or whatever, and that border collie is so locked onto that shepherd. And he whistles, and he'll do whatever. And though I'm not there yet, by any stretch of the imagination, that is what I really feel my goal is as a pastor. I want to be so locked on to the Lord and how He's telling me to guide us that it's instantaneous. And I'm helping to guide us where He wants us to go. And I can't help but feel, looking at this craziness of the world and what I've been through, that I was put here at this time to help make apologists. And so that is what I'm trying to do. And I know when I wrote this 40 lecture schedule, and again, anybody who knows my life, I'm a little busy in life. And I'm kind of terrified myself writing this because I'm like, I have a few commitments in my own life. So it's shared pain. But I really feel that we need to have this skill. And every one of us can have it. All right? It is what we need. And why do we need it right now? So why is this the job? Because the world has always been in rebellion to God. That's nothing new. You can look at every epic of time. Tower of Babel. Why we got the flood. You know, the nation of Israel. The world has always been in rebellion to God. That's nothing new. I think what's new in today's society, though, is that the world is beginning to hate truth. It used to be a battle for who owns truth, but now the world hates truth. Here, look at this. This is going to blow your mind if you haven't seen this. Never heard of this magazine until leading British medical journal, like a legitimate medical journal. This is what's on the cover. Historically, the anatomy and physiology of bodies with vaginas have been neglected. Do you understand what they're saying there? They are bowing down to liberals so much that they will not even say woman. I mean, think about that. I grew up, and if I, as a boy, who obviously, like most boys, had a one-trained mind, was ever like, wow, I was really interested in that woman with breastfeeding devices. I mean, can you imagine? And we have one of the most renowned medical journals in this world that is now calling women bodies with vaginas. You aren't a woman, you're a body with a vagina. I mean, this is our world. I mean, this is not Babylon Bee. This is not The Onion. This is The Lancet, the premier British medical journal. This is where we're headed. And if you don't understand how to engage someone that is so far off the rails, you're not going to have any ability to have a conversation with them. And we have got to engage them. We cannot be the Christians pre-Scopes monkey trial who say it's just about faith. We don't have to have logic or reason. We just need to have faith. Yes, you have faith. But we are made up in God's image, which means we have ration, we have volition, we have emotion. And all three of those are necessary in the Christian faith. And we've got to use our brains to engage this world. It doesn't matter how crazy they get, you've always got to stand on truth. This blew my mind. All right, I'm going to read for you a passage in Romans. It's the first chapter in Romans. Starting with verse 24. Oh, we're there yet. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness and the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, to exchange the truth of God for the lie, and worship and serve the creature, rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged their natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God their knowledge, God gave them over to the debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. My kids are in here. Undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Now see, the key in this passage is I want you to understand is we always make the mistake of latching on to the sin. Right? Is it stealing, theft, homosexuality, whatever? It's not. The sin is obviously an issue. But that's the fruit and leaves. The problem is the root. What is the root of the sin? Look at verse 25 and 28. Verse 25. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. Verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind. See, the key is when you depart the truth of God, is when you jump fully into the depth of sin. That is why classical apologetics is the tool we need right now in this world, because the world is hating the truth. They're departing from the knowledge of God. They don't want anything to do with the truth of God. And that's why we have to get out there and proclaim it and defend it. We are wasting our time. Not wasting our time. Let me change that. It is not the most efficient and effective use. Alright, is abortion a sin? 100%. But even if you get someone to step away from abortion, you still have not led them to Christ. You lead a person to Christ and everything else will fall away. That is the key. We have got to be focused on the truth, proclaiming the truth, defending the truth. And I can tell you from my own personal story, if you don't understand it, know how to defend it, know how to proclaim it, you will be hesitant to engage people. And maybe you won't, but I know I was. I was terrified to engage people because they would challenge me in a way and I felt that I couldn't answer it. I could never answer dinosaurs. I could never answer why there was long people. I could never answer how I believe the world was created in 7 days. I couldn't answer why God considered homosexuality sin. I never could answer these things, and so I refused to engage with people I knew who didn't believe. And my beliefs have not changed since I was a teenage boy in a Southern Baptist church in Columbia, Alabama. But my understanding, my depth of knowledge, and my passion, and my boldness for it have exploded. And I really feel that apologetics is such a useful tool because it's all about Christ. See, what classical apologetics does is it starts at the foundation of truth and it carries all the way over to the formulation of the Trinity. So no matter where you engage an opponent, you jump in that spectrum and you go up to Christ. Everybody's on a different spectrum. Everybody's in a different spot. So you can talk about alien crystals, or you can start with someone who believes in the wrong God. It's a lot of fun stuff. Now I want to get back to, real quick, as we get close, I'm going to be close to home time. I want to go back to that video from Ronald Reagan. So I didn't know much about that video. A friend of mine sent that to me. And obviously it was quite an impressive video. Almost made me want to go back to the Marine Corps. Then I remembered what the Marine Corps was like, and I'm like, and I was going to make a joke about being in God's Marine Corps, not God's Army. And I'm like, it was somewhere in there. But in that video, so that video was made in 1964, when President Reagan was doing a campaign for Barry Goldwater, presidential campaign. And obviously, I never heard of the gentleman before this, but he obviously did become president. And it was in the height of the Cold War, so in 1964 I did a little bit more research. You know, we just had the Bay of Pigs, we just had what was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I didn't live during those times, but I can imagine during those times that the Soviet Union was a legitimate concern, and nuclear death was a legitimate, I am truly concerned that all the world may get wiped out from these two nations. This was a legitimate thing. And President Reagan had the foresight to say, look, America, if we don't keep fighting this insurmountable fight, we're going to end up on our knees and change. We've got to step up and fight. And he makes 4 points that I think are phenomenal. 1, do we accept peace at any cost? Will accommodation, will it lead to victory or defeat? Do we aim to survive or thrive? And truth or peace, which one matters? Now, for us in Christianity, we can have peace. We just got to stop preaching. It's easy to have peace in a church. We just have to stop preaching. I mean, have you ever asked yourself, why is it that Hollywood and the media hates Christianity so much? They'll bring on Islam, they'll bring on Wiccans, pagans, any other faith, but they absolutely hate Christianity. Why is that?
Truth.
It's the truth, and there's two things about Christianity. We will never back down from two things. One is that Jesus Christ is the only way. So we can never accept any other way, where all those other religions make accommodations for each other. We can never do that. And the second is, we will never stop preaching against sin. True Christianity will never stop preaching against sin, and they will always hate us for those two factors. Now, the accommodation part, we can boost our numbers, we can get our building fund up, we can get more seats filled, we just got to accommodate a little erosion in biblical truth. Because what we preach up here is always going to be hard-nosed. And I promise you, it's not going to fill the pews. I'm not going to badmouth, but I think anybody who's gone to bigger churches can see what I'm talking about. The message is generally softer. The stances on doctrine is a lot less defined. And I'm not saying they're filling seats, I'm just saying that's the character trait. Where at this church, we're always going to be very hard-nosed in preaching what we believe is God's truth. We're not going to accommodate with that. Survive or thrive in that portion. The point I wanted to make with that one is a little bit different from President Reagan's, which his was real spot on for that situation. But in Christianity, I will say we don't know what epoch of time we're called to live in. America may have a third great awakening. We may all look at the insanity. People may wake up and say, this is stupid. Like, let's get back on track. It could happen. We could have a revival in people's hearts and this could become a flourish again. Or we continue on the train wreck we're headed on. I don't know. But the bottom line is, regardless of whether or not you are called to thrive or survive in terms of like an economic situation, you have to know, understand where God has put me, regardless of what financial, economic, social, kind of status I have in that period of my life. I want to go to that slide, trust me. The last part I want to end on, as the band comes up, is truth or peace. Which one are you preparing for? That is really the question you've got to ask. Now here at Athol Baptist, we're offering this on apologist because we want all of you to prepare for truth. If you feel you're prepared, I'm not going to argue with you. I won't be the one you stand before to give an account of what you've done with your time, treasure, and talents. But I'm telling you, here at Athol Baptist, we are ready to prepare you. You know, our family verse, this is our family verse in my family. Verse is it reminds us that we have a part to play. God, when you become a Christian, doesn't give you a magic pill. He doesn't take over your life. Like, you have a part to play. You've got to do the work. I know you look at that 40 days, 40 lectures, and you're like, oh my goodness, are you out of your mind? But unfortunately, the things to be good at something, you can't just do it in a weekend. Anything that takes talent takes time. You want to have a good family, you've got to work at it every day. My wife deals with me every day. That's why she's an amazing woman. All right? I wish more than anything I could just have you download how to do it, but I can't. But I promise you, this is what I'm going to focus on next sermon, so please join me for next week. And I hope to inspire each of you to understand that you all have the tools needed to step up. You just have got to step up. I can't do that for you.